Hello, people. Welcome back to our series on Hegel and the philosophy of history.
Yes.
We're going to continue our section on Indian history, and today we're going to be discussing the state and its history, and some stuff about astronomy as well.
Yeah, some stuff.
Yes.
So yeah,
Ahilleas?
So we've been talking about the place that India occupies in Hegel's conception of the development of world history. And we're at this point here where we're talking about the state or the states of India and their histories. And this section doesn't have a lot of logical analysis. It's got a lot of history in it, but it starts off with quite a helpful logical point, right? Which is, it's in the first paragraph of it. It's where Hegel writes something like, "The view of freedom is not fulfilled freedom, but is instead empty abstraction." Then he goes on to say, "This withdrawal from self and this lack of freedom marks the Hindu's concrete life, what we call the state, purpose, wholeness, rational law, or ethical life. And that's in brackets, can have no place, cannot be present." So nothing is left for concrete relationships but contingency of willing or caprice, which cannot arrive at a political constitution. So, I mean, the basic point is, for the reasons that we've discussed in previous episodes on India, that this the way the Indian state, religion, art, all that is sort of set up is in this logical structure, let's say, of empty abstraction, where it's in a negative relationship to, let's say, reality or the world. And because it's in that sort of relationship, it remains indeterminate. And when it comes to the state, I get the feeling that what's really what's the core of the indeterminacy is the lack of a political constitution. That seems to be what Hegel, and that seems to be what he sort of focuses on through the examples that he gives in the rest of this section when he's talking about sort of instability and succession crises and that kind of stuff. What do you think?
Yeah. Worth mentioning also is that he states the Hindu principle of political life is caprice and contingency.
Yeah.
It seems like Hegel doesn't find that there is a kind of thought or an idea of a political organization throughout the histories of India. It resembles kind of feudalism or kind of like broken up feudalism that sometimes comes together and into a bigger unity. But even within that bigger unity, the one who's on top kind of leaves the substructure as it is, but just extracts tribute. So there isn't a sense of meaningful integrations of these units. They're self-contained, and there is a rule of the strong-willed.
Yeah. So just as a side note, it'd be interesting to see how this criticism of the political situation in India compares to, let's say, European feudalism. What is it, if anything, that's different? Is European feudalism equally also a state of contingency and caprice? Or is it not for other reasons? There's this really cool point that Hegel makes on the third paragraph, and down the middle, where he talks about succession. I just want to read out this quote. He says, "We see at once that the succession within these families is utterly uncertain, is entirely a matter of chance. So again, highlighting the contingency of the political system. Even though we consider the distinction between determinate succession and chance succession to be merely an empirical issue, we are familiar with the importance of determinacy of succession and only learn to prize a definite line of succession when we have become acquainted with the history of Oriental despots. And the reason why I wanted to quote that is because I think it gives us a kind of insight into the kind of empirical examples that Hegel is looking out for uh, when to sort of compare with the logical analysis. Um, he says, even though succession is entirely a matter of is an empirical issue, even if this distinction, he's saying it's not philosophical properly to give an account of why some political systems have determinate succession and why some have a chance succession. That's not really a subject for philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
but he's sort of picking out the indeterminacy around succession as a central example for the contingency of the state.
Mm.
So I think it's a nice way to sort of disentangle the philosophical from the empirical, because
Yes.
when you're reading this, it's quite critical of about 5,000 odd years of history, and
Yeah.
whatever Hegel might have known or misunderstood or whatever, maybe he's right, whatever the case is about this period of time, there is sort of an underlying philosophical point that he's trying to make, and he's trying to make that latch onto certain historical uh, facts, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I thought that was that was a nice illustration of that sort of duality of how Hegel
Yeah.
proceeds in this text.
I suppose succession is always going to be an issue in any kind of state anywhere, because what is at stake in succession is the state itself. How is the state going to carry itself forward in time? Because people die, generations come and go. What's the thing that keeps the organization together in some sense? And a lot of it seems to have been, at least in the past, um, will
Mm.
and power. So you
Mm. Yeah.
concentrate a lot of power around certain individuals, particularly one individual, and then those individuals who are kind of benefiting from that one individual having power, because it's all like complex web of relationships. They need some guarantees that this power is going to keeps be intact going forward. When how can you solve that? Well, you have successions. My son will take over the business, and then the business will keep on doing well, and you guys, you investors, you will get your profits, and everything will be fine, right? It's kind of like some kind of mechanism for those things, for keeping the state going.
Yeah.
One can think of different mechanisms like legal system, right? Laws and so on and so forth.
Mm.
But they break quite easily when it comes to will and power.
Yeah. I mean, I'm currently
All
reading a
you
book.
need is an Alexander or a Caesar or something, and then
Mm.
those structures totter.
Yeah. So I'm currently reading a book on King Henry VIII and his six wives. And a big topic in that book is the succession, the concerns regarding succession. It's not that strange of a topic to be reading about.
Go on, please.
And one of the a central theme, now that we're getting to the end of Catherine of Aragon's marriage to Henry VIII, is succession, because she's only been able to bear him a daughter, whereas Henry would like a son because of the the sort of the laws of inheritance. And that's interesting because it's something chance in the sense of who's going to be born, but there's like a legal framework around it. It's sort of like the nobility of the land, including the royal family, are sort of, in a sense, tied up in this legal framework of what is like what kind of succession is correct or ideal and what is not ideal. Because,
Mm.
for example, Henry VIII has a bastard son, and that's a son, but it's not from the royal bloodline, so he can't reasonably make him his heir. Um, and I wonder if maybe again, so basically, I'm picking up on your point about a legal framework for succession. I wonder whether that's the kind of distinction between contingent succession and more like a more legalistic framework of succession, whereby yes, it's sort of tied up in the chance of what kind of a child, if you're going to bear a child at all, but that that done, then it's sort of there's a sort of a structure that people have to follow, and they may not follow it, but that will have problems that
Mm.
will cause other issues further down the line. And I wonder if that's the distinction between what Hegel is saying is going on in India with regard to succession being sort of just like a battle of the stronger and constant usurpation from one side to
Yeah,
the other.
the stronger, the most cunning and opportunistic. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but you don't want too much of that because that's a sign of this instability, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because if things move around too quickly, then that defeats the point of the whole succession.
That's the point. And I wonder if that's sort of why Hegel brings this point up. It shows that maybe a lack of political constitution, a lack of a legal framework that sort of binds everything together.
Yeah, but Indian princes and lords and so on, powerful people, they had successions, didn't they?
Yeah, he says they did. What does he write? So he says, secure succession involves not merely the law of succession, but in general an ethical legal condition. However, we have attributed the succession in the Indian states to chance. The children are of course the successors, though it is unspecified as to which will be the one.
Hmm.
Hence, the history of that Indian realm is a ceaseless interplay of uprisings, conspiracies, and brutal episodes of princely family members vis-a-vis one another, the poisonings of princes, as well as a series of conspiracies of generals and public servants as such. So, yeah.
But even though you might think that this is like rife in Indian history, look at China. That
Hmm.
is like the complete opposite, with very sort of structured government bureaucracy and everything. Still just completely goes 180 every 300 years.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
like, it's not a sure way of stability, just going the other extreme either, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything
Yeah. Yeah.
that's when things crumble in that context, they crumble much worse.
Absolutely.
Here,
Yeah.
at least, you have some semblance of stability in the instability. The chaos, the multitude of many different nations and fealties and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. At least it's constantly unstable. Um, yeah. I mean, that's a good point about China. I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that China is not an ideal moment of world history either.
No, but
So
it is a moment of world history.
it is, yeah. Yeah.
And it's the China that's mainly was ancient, right? Not modern China. And whereas Indian history, as Hegel seems to look at it here, seems more recently focused, right? It's not so much the ancient Indian histories, but whatever the age of exploration kind of unveiled to us of that continent, and the
Yeah.
Greeks, I suppose, and
Well, that's the
other,
thing. Yeah.
which is a bit problematic, right? Because we don't really get a good sense of what they are and how the histories are in their own voice, apart from
Yeah.
the lips of others.
So I think this nicely brings us to the next topic, really, of this section, which is the role of history within India.
Yeah.
Because I think Hegel does want to say that this state has persisted from ancient India to the present.
Mm-hmm.
And he makes a point, again, another one of Hegel's um, applause-worthy remarks. Indian epic poems have no historical foundations. They entirely lack a relationship like that of Homer to the Trojan War. And really, what he means by saying this is, uh, I think, best summarized in a paragraph on the next page. His point is that only through history does a character fix itself in the case of a people, in that they have the image of an established prior condition whereby something firm also enters into the political aspect, in part undergirds a political constitution, in part is continually built up. And I have this vague recollection of us talking about this topic, maybe in one of the first two videos, that Hegel sees a people's relationship to its history as one of the first steps to it fixing its character, sort of seeing itself in its ancestors as being part of this progression of deeds and events.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember very well, but I have that vague recollection of that. And I think that's what Hegel is trying to get at here. The fact that, again, but if we just by looking at, I suppose, the epic poems in this regard, his point that they have no historical foundation is really a point about the character of the people not being determinate,
Mm-hmm.
um, it being rather indeterminate. And I think that's where he then gets this idea that there isn't a fixed sort of there isn't a because there isn't a fixed character, there isn't a fixed determinate people. There can't be something like a political constitution because that sort of determinacy is lacking in how the character of the people in how the people see themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I buy it. In the sense of like, okay, let's look at the Iliad and the Odyssey, and let's look at the Bhagavad Gita, right? They both have mythological elements. They both have some semblance of realism. There is like a prince there, and there is armies battling stuff, right? People journeying, going to new lands, meeting strangers, figuring, getting out of tight spots and so on, right? And also moral stories, values, like who we are and so on. I find that they're much more overlapping than not in their
Mm,
function.
yeah,
So I don't know. I'm with Hegel on this one because it seems like the Bhagavad Gita can perfectly do the kind of job that the Iliad is doing.
yeah, yeah. It does seem, yeah, the differences seem fewer than the similarities. I think I agree.
One might even push Hegel and say, well, there's more explicitly philosophical, interesting stuff happening in the Gita because there you have a prince who's supposed to fight, but he doesn't want to, and he
Hmm.
needs then convincing, right? He needs to
Hmm.
get into arguments and so on. You don't have that problem with Achilles.
No, just
You
plows
just
through.
point and he just goes, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I wonder if because we're familiar with Hegel's views on the difference between Hindu religion and Greek religion, and Hindu art and Greek art, one being sort of symbolic or being classical. I wonder if that feeds in to his view of these epic poems.
Hmm.
I mean, he talks about the vast numbers. It's funny that he sort of he fixates on this, that in the epic poems, things occur for tens of thousands of years. People rule for thousands of years. They have hundreds of children. And he sort of takes this as an example of indeterminacy. It's um it's a very interesting anthropological point, really, but it doesn't seem to be sufficiently determinate to make the point he wants to make.
Yeah, it's not convincing.
I mean, in
Like
the Old
even
Testament as well, right? Who was it?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
like Noah lived for like 250 years. Okay, it's not 10,000 years, but you know, still quite
yeah,
old.
yeah.
Um,
Farther back in time you go, the more mythic stuff just gets, and even like early
yeah,
historians are just kind of wacky with their details and just like, yeah, there was an army of 300,000, whatever.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, what Hegel is trying to do, obviously, it's clear. He's trying to undergird this point about contingency and indeterminacy and a lack of a political constitution.
Like freedom. Yeah,
Yeah, but whether these are the right examples to make that point or not it's not entirely convincing, I think.
yeah. Another thing that kind of might bring this together is towards the end he talks about how the Hindus, I quote, the Hindus have no historical perspective and are incapable of any historiography.
Mm,
End of quote. So it seems like um, what's lacking, maybe for Hegel, is just a very clear sense of time. Like like the Egyptians were very meticulous about the histories. You had this pharaoh and he lived here, and then that pharaoh and that he lived there, and they just kept the record very nice and kind of solid. Not perfect, but it was for like that amount of time. It was pretty solid. Um,
yeah.
whereas here, it's much. Oh, the issue seems to be that the tampering with the data is much more of a thing.
Yeah, yeah. He talks about how sort of kings are sort of omitted in lists of dynasties, or they're just added in, even though there's no evidence they ever existed.
Yeah. So, but
Yeah,
this happens, a lot of a lot of other places as well. Like a lot of rulers don't like their ancestors for whatever reasons or something, and they just try to erase them. Right? That
yeah,
happens all the time.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I think it's more of like a does the nation or the culture have a discipline of history?
I mean, he
Because
makes
if
the
they have
point that we
that,
have nothing of theirs, that we have nothing of their historical documents. That
yeah,
everything we know about them is from the Greeks or the Persians or
yeah,
more recently the British. So clearly, that also seems to be an important point for him, the fact that they haven't written their own history.
hmm,
And again, given how the lectures on world history begin with the discussion on original, reflective, and philosophical history, that seems important. Hegel seems to have foregrounded the importance of how a people relates to its history. Um,
yeah,
again, just to bring it back, it has to do something with their character. I should reread that section. It's got something to do with how they see themselves as a people. And it's when they see themselves, they can only see themselves as a people once they're able to look back at their history, and that's how they sort of become a people in a state.
Hmm. But if they have no history to look back to, then they will make up one.
Yeah, which I think is what he's
But
getting at with the
which
epic
is what you
poems.
get with early civilizations, is that there's a lot of mythic stuff happening, right? We're
Yeah.
descendants of these demigods and these gods or whatever, these lineages, or these persons were blessed by so and so. But the movement is one in which you go from divine big giants period with lots of titanic stuff, struggles happening, to sort of
Mhm.
small scale, here we are, human beings in the Middle Ages, trying to make our way through the soil.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um,
But we don't see them as ourselves. I think that's probably what's missing, right? I think this is the modern conception of history. Is like, yeah, the ancient Hindus were just people doing people stuff. They had
mhm.
wacky ideas, but they were going off of their context. And we have no doubt that is anything magical or mythical involved there.
Mhm.
Like really.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I don't really have anything else to say on this section.
Yeah. Uh, Me neither, really. So we just close it there then?
Yeah, also, yeah, we should also mention though, because the next section that we're meant to do, astronomy and art, is
Yeah,
very
it's a
bare.
single page. It's very bare.
Not just a page, it's one paragraph where he talks about how they don't care too much about precision in astronomy. And then there's another paragraph where he just says stuff, but he doesn't actually make any. I don't even know if he thinks Indian art is good. I have no idea what I meant to think from that paragraph. Um, it's a very, yeah, he didn't really try much in this section, I think.
Yeah, he just pulled a fast one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's much
Well,
to it.
no, exactly. So I think we can justifiably ignore it and move on. I'm sure there's much more. I think a much more relevant section to know about his attitude towards Indian art would be the lectures on aesthetics than this
Yeah,
section, I think.
yeah, yeah. Definitely, that's right.
Okay, then.
All right.
So next week we're going to continue with our Hegel's analysis of India and its place in world history.
Yeah.
And
Is it going to be the last episode on India?
yeah, it will be. Yeah,
All right. So we then bring it together and see how it fits into as a piece of a larger puzzle.
yeah, that's right. And then I think we go to Persia, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
I'll be sure to
Round
pack
of life.
my silk moccasins.
Excellent. Well, people,
Oh,
thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one.
yeah,
Cheers. Bye bye.
thank you. Bye bye.